Hello and welcome to Someone Explain Google Tag Manager to Me, Please. So this is going to be a high-level overview of what Google Tag Manager is, what it does, what you can do with it, and some of the bigger confusions and misconceptions that I've run into about it. So I get a lot of questions about Google Tag Manager, and I wanted to put together this presentation to try and explain things in a way that's easy to understand, even if you haven't worked with it before or you don't have a super technical background. All right, so before we get started, everyone has these little spiels introducing themselves and their companies, and so I'm going to force you to listen to mine. My name is Emily Patterson, and I run a digital agency called Measure. We focus on digital measurement, so helping mostly nonprofit and government organizations figure out what they need to be tracking, what data they need to get the insights that they want, how to do that, handle the implementation, and then also the analysis side of helping them figure out how to use that data and find insights into it. So it's kind of from the beginning to the end. And if you're interested in learning more about that, feel free to send me an email. My address is on this slide. You can also reach out on my website, bemeasure.com. All right. So first off, we're going to talk about what we're going to be talking about today. Like I said, this webinar is a high-level overview of what is Google Tag Manager. So I get a lot of questions, and this is kind of the training that I feel like is most requested from clients. Just a big understanding of what is it, what can be done with it, what problems will it solve at your organization or company, and what problems won't it solve, and then some FYIs of things I wish everyone knew before they went and migrated everything over to Tag Manager. All right, so I am married to a school teacher, and one of his big lessons in education is don't tell the students what you don't want them to know and repeat. So I'm going to break that rule right now because this presentation, at least the first part of it, is centered around 3 myths that I really wish people would stop repeating about Tag Manager because they simply aren't true. So the big myth number 1 that I hear a lot is that Google Tag Manager, which for simplicity's sake, I'm referring to as GTM, is not a new version of Google Analytics. I hear this one a lot out there, and I want to say I see where this comes from, but that's simply not true. We're going to dive into this a little bit. So I see where the confusion about Google Tag Manager being a new version of Google Analytics comes from. I think it comes from this. This is a screenshot of your Google Analytics code that you install on the header of your site. And this is a screenshot of the Google Tag Manager code that you install on the header in your site. So the idea here of like how you install it and kind of what it looks like is very similar. It kind of seems like, okay, this is kind of a 2.0 version of Google Analytics. It's like a bunch of JavaScript that you stick in the header of your website. Well, they're actually 2 totally separate programs, and they are complementary. So you would, in almost every situation, you would use both Google Analytics and Tag Manager. I have been explaining it like Google Analytics is the what. It's all the data that you get from your website. You know, it's your numbers, it's your information about where your users live and what they're doing on the site. And how often they're visiting, all of those stats. The Google Tag Manager is the how. It's the program that you use to control what stats you get. I realize a lot of times this seems a little abstract. So inspired by this weekend's Super Bowl, I came up with a better way, I think, of describing it. So Google Analytics is your TV. It's not your actual TV, it is the content on the TV. So it's all of your favorite shows, it's that movie that's on at 11 p.m. on Wednesday. It's, it's Netflix, it's HBO, it's the 11 o'clock news, blah, blah, blah. It's all of the content. Google Tag Manager is the remote control. It is the device that you use to control what content, or in the case of Google Analytics, what data is displayed there. So it kind of governs the rules. Google Analytics is the content. So you type into your remote, hey remote, let's go to channel 6 and see what's on. On the TV, channel 6 is what displays. So it has a similar cause and effect sort of relationship, just like a TV and a remote control. All right, myth number 2. GTM is a magical solution to all of my data problems. I know at this point, since Google Analytics has been around for a while, and we're living in this age of data where everything needs to be measured and all insights need to be backed up by data, it's easy to look for what seems like a magical solution to all of your problems. And I hate to tell you, Google Tag Manager is great. I use it every single day of my work. But it is not a magical solution to absolutely everything. And I think that this is, a lot of people don't know exactly what it is, and they're hoping it will solve all their problems, but instead it solves a very specific problem, which I'm going to explain. All right, so this is a picture of a very pretty wall, but it's a way of illustrating a story that I have here. So I used to work in an office that if you wanted to make any changes to your office decor, instead of just grabbing a hammer and nail from your home and bringing it in and hanging up a picture, you needed to call the office repair maintenance guy, and he would come and hang your picture for you, or hang your shelf, or hang your artwork. So every time you wanted to make a change to what's on that wall, you needed to call him, schedule in advance. He would come and put something up, or he would come and take it down. So you could see, if you were an art lover, you had a lot of different stuff to display, and you had a stuff that's seasonal that you like to swap out all the time, that this would become very cumbersome. You could quickly have this whole wall that's full of paintings, and every single time you want to make a change, you have to call somebody else to do it. So it's a real disincentive for wanting to change things up a lot or adding new things to it. So this situation is a lot like a bigger website with an active marketing presence, but without Google Tag Manager. You can have all this stuff on there. In the case of a website, instead of being a bunch of pretty pictures, it's going to be things like your Facebook pixels, your tracking for your form submissions. We'll go more into this later. It's all going to be JavaScript that's stuck all over your website, and every single time you want to make a change to it, say you have a campaign that ends, instead of just being able to do that yourself, you're going to have to ask your development department, hey, can you remove this code? Can you change this code? A lot of times they won't be able to do it until the next deployment or the next sprint. So you're kind of stuck on their schedule. This goes back to the TV analogy. So Google Tag Manager, like I said before, is a lot like having a TV. So instead of putting your beautiful photograph of the ferns here on the wall, instead you have your remote and you click on it and you call up that fern image on your TV. So instead of having a bunch of stuff stuck all over your website that you can't really control, you have to get someone else to do it, you have control over that, and every image is on this nice TV box, so it's not like all over the place, it's just in one small container. So Google Tag Manager, the big problem I would say that it solves is it changes who gets the remote or who gets control. Instead of that control over what gets tracked, when it gets tracked, how it gets tracked. Being in the IT department, this is something that marketing can kind of take back. So if you want something set up or taken down, you have the remote now, so you can click the button and you can make that content appear or disappear on your TV. Cool. Some great analogies. All right. So I've talked a little bit about how Google Analytics is like a TV and Google Tag Manager is like a remote, and that's all cool. But maybe you're sitting here and you're thinking, all right, what does this have to do with real life? What do I actually do with this remote at my organization? Unfortunately, I have an answer to that. So if you were here last time, I had a webinar that talked about Google Analytics and why a lot of the metrics for Google Analytics were kind of strange or outdated. I had this image here, and I'm going to bring that back up again. Google Analytics this article dates from last month, but Google Analytics is I think it was 14 years old. So it's going back to a time when the web was a lot of different pages. And Google Analytics best tracks page views. So if you have a lot of pages on your website, like this article right here, where every single time you click to a new image, it loads a page, so you can easily see which images do people see, how far did they get through the article, by looking at your page views. However, these days, so this is how Google was set up originally, Google Analytics. These days, a lot of websites instead look like this. This is one of my clients, maybe they're on here, or past clients. It's one of these long scroll, not in this case, but a lot of sites now are infinite scroll. Instead of having a new page for every single piece of content, you have one long page with a whole bunch of different types of content on it. So if your Google Analytics is just tracking page views, you can see like, okay, a lot of people viewed this page, but out of all this different stuff on here, which got the most interaction? Did people play this video? Did they sign up for this email? Did they click here or there? We don't know. So that's where Google Tag Manager comes in. And it actually does a whole bunch of other things too, I'm going to talk about in a second. But when it comes to Google Analytics, this is the primary reason I think that a nonprofit would want to install it, is that using it, you can use it to track all of these other actions on your page that otherwise you would have no insight to. So you can see if people are clicking on this Learn More button, or you can see if people are signing up for the newsletter, or if they're playing the video, or how far down they're getting to the page. So rather than just seeing that page view report, you can get all of this other insight. So this is called event tracking in Google Analytics, if you want to look up more information. Cool. So this is a couple of examples I had for Tag Manager. So I was saying, just like you would use your remote to maybe program your DVR, even though like a good millennial, I haven't done this in a long time. So instead of every Sunday at 10 or 9 p.m., record the new episode of Game of Thrones, you're instead programming Tag Manager to do something similar. So every time someone submits a form, send this data to Google Analytics. Or every time somebody views this page, load the Facebook pixel to tell my Facebook ad that we had a conversion. So it's the same sort of cause and effect thing that you can use Tag Manager to set up rules to fire into these other programs. All right, and then our final myth of today is that, and you should probably know that this is a myth from the examples I have been giving previously, is that you can only use GTM for Google Analytics. So a lot of misconceptions here about Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. It is both not a new version of Google Analytics, and it also works with many other types of programs besides Google Analytics. In fact, I wanted to provide a screenshot of all of the different programs that Google Tag Manager has an integration with, but there was so many, there was no way to fit it on one slide. So if you are curious, you can certainly go and look at that list for yourself. I wanted to start with the caveat that, like all Google products, Google loves Google. If Google Tag Manager will work with a lot of different things, those are the next slides, but it works best with other Google products. So it integrates really well with Google Analytics, Google AdWords, now known as Google Ads, Optimize. Of course, it has great integrations with all Google products. However, maybe the most common way that I see Google Tag Manager used is to run your advertising tags. So, this is a whole nother webinar topic in and of itself. But if you run Facebook ads at your organization, most likely you will have installed what they call the Facebook Pixel. So what this is when it loads on your site, you can tell that somebody who has seen your advertising on Facebook has now come to your site or completed an action on your site. The easiest way to install that, so you're helping to track the effectiveness of your advertising. You can also use it for remarketing, so targeting a certain group of people who visited your site with advertising on Facebook. But yeah, definitely a whole other webinar. But if you want an easy way to do this, certainly you can use Google Tag Manager to run your Facebook pixels, your LinkedIn pixels, Twitter pixels, any pixels for any advertising, as far as I know, can be run through Google Tag Manager. I don't believe these may or may not have official integrations, but they will give you some HTML that you can copy and paste and put in a tag in Tag Manager. It's pretty simple. Google Tag Manager can be used to run other types of services. These are two of my favorite examples that I run for clients. Website surveys. This is a Google product. So you can set these pop-up boxes and you can set up rules to say, hey, when somebody visits XYZ pages, serve them this survey. You can also do crazy egg or hotjar heat mapping to see where are people clicking, how far are they scrolling, that sort of stuff. And I'm sure there's plenty of other new integrations that I don't even really know about it. It's anything that you would previously have uploaded the code to the website itself can now be run through Google Tag Manager. I also wanted to encourage everyone here to be creative when it comes to Tag Manager. Certainly, it's about firing your advertising pixels and it's about tracking actions on your site, but you can also do some really cool things to get insight into what types of people are using your site and how they're using it. So this was the result of one project that I did for a client. They have a website that is for forests, people who own forested land. It helps educate them and encourage them to do conservation activities on their land, like in this case, get a conservation easement. So they have pretty much like a funnel, stages that they're trying to encourage people to move through. So the first one here being, to learn about your land, then make preparations to do something, and then to actually do that action. They came up with this idea that we need to move people through these three phases, and they wanted insight into, how many people are in each group, how can we market to each group to get them to move to the next one. So I was able to use Google Tag Manager to set up all of this tracking because you can, with each action on the website, a certain group was affiliated with it, worked with a developer to send that data into the data layer, which honestly is a GTM Part 2 webinar, sorry, and then send that data to Google Analytics. So basically, if this metadata data exists on your website, it can be sent using Tag Manager to Google Analytics, and you're able to then affiliate other usage information and marketing information about that that you would normally pull out of Google Analytics. So it's pretty cool. And this is just one example, but I think it helps to kind of see what else has been done. And one more example around this lines was I worked with 4-H. They have a bunch of different forms on their website where people can download different content or sign up for different programs. They were, of course, tracking completions of these, but they were really interested in specifically finding how are they best reaching 4-H alumni, so people who had been involved in 4-H as a kid. And you can use, similar to this, Google Tag Manager can pull data about which field they were checking when they selected this drop down, and send that into Google Tag Manager or into Google Analytics so you can affiliate it with the marketing efforts. So pretty much it's about connecting stuff that's happening on your website to your Google Analytics data so that you can get insight into that. Cool. All right, so that first section here was all about debunking some of the 3 big myths that I see about Google Tag Manager. So basically, it solves a very specific issue that you, as you get more sophisticated with tracking and advertising, you're going to run into at your organization. It's also not a new version of Google Analytics. You're going to run it in conjunction with Google Analytics. And the other thing being that though it's a Google product, it integrates really well with a bunch of other things, including, believe it or not, Facebook. All right, so if I've sold you on Google Tag Manager and you're thinking, okay, this is really awesome, we should be using this at our office, I have a couple of heads up for you, and then I can certainly take questions, and I'm happy to answer anything that you want some insight into. So you're all ready to move to GTM, or maybe you even have Tag Manager installed on your website, but you just haven't been using it in any way. These are my 4 big tips. I do a lot of Tag Manager audits, and so I've seen all of the various ways you can make a mess of your Tag Manager. So these are my big heads up that I think you should watch out for, because they are very common. All right, number 1. So you know how I talked about how Google Tag Manager is a TV, or Google Tag Manager is your remote. Your TV shows is Google Analytics. So your TV is pretty much what Google Tag Manager calls a container. So it's this box that you install on your website. It's that code that I displayed there. And you put all of your tracking tags kind of inside of it. So it's kind of like you're packing and you're putting like your puppy inside a box. All right. So if you have a fresh Google Tag Manager account, the first thing you will need to do is to create a container, quote unquote, and put the container code on your website. The first thing I'm going to tell you is, unless you are a very large organization with a complex structure, you probably do not need more than 1 container. I think some people think, oh, I need a container for each view that I have set up in Google Analytics. Like I have a view for my blog, and I have a view for this event this event subdomain. I need a container for each one. It's like, you absolutely do not. It's going to make managing Google Tag Manager a lot more complicated. The only times I've run into where you need more than 1 container is you have a complex organization where, like for example, a university, where they have a marketing team in each department, and they have too many of them to use this feature in Google Analytics called workspaces, because the marketing teams are all pretty much doing their own things. They need the freedom to upload their own tags because they have different goals and outlets and initiatives. But for a medium-sized organization, 1 container is probably fine. All right, the next thing you need to know is if you have Google Analytics on your site and you're running either WordPress or Drupal, you probably have, you're running your Google Analytics code through your CMS. So there's probably some field somewhere where you took your ID number, it's going to be UA dash blah, 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 and you put it in that field, and then now you have Google Analytics. Well, if you're going to install Tag Manager, you need to take that ID, delete it, and you're going to want to run it through Google Tag Manager instead. In Google Analytics, or in WordPress, there's a very nice plugin called GTM for WordPress, easy to remember, that you can use to control Tag Manager from the WordPress interface. I highly recommend that. So in that case, you could switch your plugins and use that instead. But what you don't want to do is have Google Analytics tracking in your CMS, and then you don't want to install Google Analytics in Google Tag Manager. You will be double tracking your website. So make sure you move it out of Drupal or WordPress first before you put the new tag in Tag Manager. All right, and then after you do that, that would be my first thing to do. The next step would be to do a bit of an audit to see what other tags are you running on your website. So like we talked about before, are you running Facebook pixels and you have that code installed on your site? Did you, back in the day, have the dev team install some code to track certain clicks on the site, like clicks on outbound links? That can all be removed and moved over to Tag Manager. You're going to have to think a little bit about the timing and make sure that there's not a huge gap. If you delete it, then you move into Tag Manager, you want to make sure that's done in as small a time frame as possible. And then my last tip here is to keep it clean. So this is coming from somebody who is rather messy, but even I can be a little crazy about keeping my Google Tag Manager clean. Like I said, if you have a bunch of people in marketing who are using this, and they're all installing tags and they're labeling things differently and they're all working in one space, it can easily become an overwhelming mess. So I recommend thinking this through ahead of time, maybe appointing one person to take care of it, coming up with some naming conventions. There's folders in there now where you can file things. Just don't go in and start posting a bunch of tags because quickly you will have so much tracking and you don't know what causes what, and it can be very confusing to launch or delete old things. So definitely, before you get too far into it, definitely worth thinking through some sort of rules around how things are named, how things are filed, who has permissions, those sort of housekeeping issues. Cool. So that's all I have to share with you today. I see we still have a few minutes left, so I'm happy to take any questions. This was meant to be kind of a high-level overview of what you can do with Tag Manager, but if you have any specific questions, I'm happy to take those. So just feel free to type into the box. There we go. All right. Let's see. Great. Looks like I got a question about more resources. So if you do want to learn more about Tag Manager, one place, there is a Tag Manager guru who is Finnish. His name is Simo Ahava, which I know is quite the mouthful, but you can certainly Google him and check out his tutorials. He does a really great job of explaining how you can use Tag Manager to do some of this more advanced tracking. We had, like I talked about, measuring fields on, capturing fields on forms, that sort of thing. He's a really great resource. Of course, Google Analytics Academy also has some great videos to get you started with the basics. Oh, any other questions? All right. If we don't have anything else, you're certainly welcome to shoot me an email, and I'm happy to help. But I think we're going to wrap it up for today. I told you I'd keep it under 40 minutes. So I will send out a, if you want to share this with any colleagues, I will send out the recording to everybody on the list. You're welcome to share it, and I'll post the slides online. And next, I will announce next month's webinar, which I think might also focus on Google Tag Manager. But if you have any requests, go ahead and email me, and I'm certainly taking new ideas for topics for anything related to data that you'd like to see. Great. Well, thank you so much, and have a lovely weekend.